Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, both in the room and online, and good afternoon to anyone who's following us on the live stream. I'll go straight into the agenda. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Just one apology from Councillor Richard John.
Okay, but we have a substitute. Councillor Neil is standing in his place. Welcome, Councillor Neil. Good to see you. Nice map behind you.
Yeah, the problem is I'm blocking out some of the good bits. I'll try and move around a bit. So yeah, I'll try and move around so everywhere it gets a turn.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? In that case, Cabinet, I would draw your attention to item 3. The reports that we received from select committees on the scrutiny of the budget. For the purposes of those watching on live stream, this includes the feedback from Place Scrutiny Committee on the 6th of February, the minutes of Place Scrutiny Committee the 6th of February, feedback from Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee on the 11th of February, minutes of Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee on the 11th of February, feedback from People Scrutiny Committee the 18th of February, and minutes of People Scrutiny Committee the 8th of February. I would like to thank all the chairs of the 3 committees for providing us with this, the minutes and feedback in such a timely manner, which allowed it to inform systematically, as it were, our revising of the budget, which we present today. Also to be noted, in the case of Place, there were a number of questions asked, and for the record, those have either been responded to or are in the process of being responded to. And I will then bring us on to item 4, the approvals of a discretionary policy for council tax premiums. That would be you, Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Leader. Good. Council tax premiums for long-term empty properties and second homes have been in place now for almost a year. During this time, a council tax premium appeals panel has been established to consider requests for exceptions to the premium. To date, the appeal panel has considered 37 appeals. These appeals have identified areas of similarity, especially when a property that has been empty for an extended period of time is purchased. Currently, anyone buying a long-term empty property is immediately charged the council tax premium. This potentially hinders people's ability to bring the property back into use in a timely manner. The appeal panel therefore proposed that the council use the discretionary powers available under the legislation to introduce some further local exceptions to council tax premiums. These additional exceptions are aimed at helping people who purchase long-term empty properties bring them back into use. They would also help speed up decision-making for the ratepayer and reduce administration for the Revenues and Shared Service Appeal Panel. The proposed exceptions are a local exception for long-term empty properties limited to 6 months. And this would apply where a property has been subject to a council tax premium and is sold, and the property remains empty. This local exception would apply either until the property is occupied or the 6 months has expired. A local exception for long-term empty properties for 12 months, and this would apply when a property that has been subject to a council tax premium is sold, the property remains empty and is also undergoing major structural works to bring the property back into use. This local exception would either apply until the property is occupied or the 12 months has expired. 2 further additional exceptions, a time-limited discretion and a general discretionary exception are also proposed. These would only apply in limited circumstances as outlined in the report and the accompanying policy. The discretionary policy seeking your approval today brings together these 4 new additional exceptions, plus the previously agreed local exception for self-catering properties, moving from the commercial list to the domestic list. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. That's all very straightforward, and I'm glad to see that after a year of implementation, we are looking at these exceptions. And I'd like to thank the officers for the good work they've done in the analysis and bringing the evidence towards Cabinet. Is there any observations or comments, Cabinet? Councillor Birch.
Thank you, Lily. Can I just say how pleased I am that the appeals panel's brought these proposals for flexibility forwards? It's absolutely right that as we move into the second year of the policy, it's reviewed. The empty home surcharge is clearly having an effect on bringing properties back into use. And I'd very much like to praise the way in which the council tax and the housing options teams are working together. So that on the one hand, we've got a substantial disincentive to leaving a property empty, and on the other hand, assistance to bring it back into use, including a package to support repairs linked to the Welsh Government leasing scheme. If the owner doesn't want to put their property up for sale or to live in it themselves. And it's great that we can support people who are doing the right thing and bringing properties back into use. And with regard to the second home surcharge, it's clear that too is having an effect. I think we all want to see properties move back into permanent occupation, but not to damage the holiday-let businesses that have been brought into the scope of council tax for the first time, or where the property is really not suitable for permanent occupation. So I think it's great that the appeals panel have their finger on the pulse in this way. And thank you for bringing the report.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. We have two recommendations, which Councillor Callard has already outlined, that we use our discretionary powers under the Local Government Finance Act to introduce those exceptions outlined by Councillor Callard. Do we agree?
Yep.
And do we also approve the discretionary policy for council tax premiums, which details all locally agreed exceptions? Are we agreeing there? There you go, Richard. That's passed. I'll move us on to item 4B, the final revenue and capital budget proposals. And that's over to you again, Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Leila. I'm pleased to present to you today our final budget for the 2025-2026 financial year. You'll all be aware of the continuing financial challenges that we face in local government and the importance of setting the council on a sustainable financial path. For the third year in a row, Monmouthshire County Council has faced a funding gap of over £20 million. That's around 10% of our revenue budget, year on year on year. This gap represents the additional cost to the council of providing the same services as it did in the previous year. It's caused by increases in demand for our services and from increasing complexity, especially in social care, alongside other inflationary pressures. This year, we published a draft budget which was not fully balanced. We left a gap of £2.9 million. The reason for this is that we were in negotiations with Welsh Government regarding additional funding for Monmouthshire. I'm pleased to say that due to our good working relationship with Welsh Government and following persistent lobbying by our leader and our colleagues across the WLGA, a funding floor was implemented, bringing in much needed additional funding. When this is combined with additional specific grant funding that further offsets revenue costs, we have been able to present a balanced budget without having to make further savings from within our services or adjust our proposed council tax increase. This year, our revenue budget will increase by £15 million to £214 million. In order to respond to demand within our services, we will be increasing our education budget by £7.4 million, a rise of 11.3%. We will be increasing our health and social care budget by £7.2 million, a rise of 10.6%. And after making allowances for additional grant funding, we will be increasing our neighbourhood services budget by £2.6 million, an increase of 9.7%. We will also be committing an additional £2.3 million to repair our roads, highway structures, footpaths and valued public rights of way. This will increase to over £3 million following this week's announcement by Welsh Government to even further commitment in their final budget to fund highway repairs. And this is on top of the extra £1 million we committed in last year's budget to help improve the condition of our roads. I find it always feels particularly pressing at this time of year when, following the winter weather, our roads are often in a poorer condition. Last week, the public consultation for the draft budget concluded. Thank you to everyone who participated, whether that was at one of the drop-in sessions, the online sessions, responding to the survey, or one of the events we held for specific groups. The questions and challenge we received greatly helps us to understand your priorities. We've reviewed the feedback, and a small number of budget savings proposals were clearly causing concern within our communities. While we don't have the financial headroom to reverse all of these savings, we're pleased to be able to say that we've removed the proposal to reduce the opening hours of the 4 town centre community hubs. As the front door for many to the council, it's important that our door is always open. As an administration, we seek to protect the services that mean the most to our residents. We know how important our public services are to you. From the moment you step out of your door in the morning to the moment you return home at night, and from your first day in school to your care in your later years. To support these services, we are proposing to increase council tax by 7.8%. This will provide nearly £6 million of support to our schools, caregivers and neighbourhood services. Protecting the most vulnerable in our society and protecting our environment will continue to be our priorities. And with this budget, we are setting Monmouthshire County Council on a sustainable, progressive trajectory. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. Colleagues, does anyone want to add anything to this budget?
I'd just like to make a comment, if I may, Leader. Looking at the proposals as they relate to the Learning Skills and Economy Directorate, Councillor Callard alluded to it, but let me be more direct and say this is like no other budget that we have passed during my entire time on this council. They are usually a time for the tremendous wringing of hands and money being taken from schools year after year after year, to the point where heads have been fairly desperate knowing what was going to be in some budgets. But the section of the pie that relates to education, if you like, virtually 3/4 of those who took part in the survey agree or strongly agree with the proposals, which is tremendous. And what was really nice to see was that the strongest support, over 2/3 of those who responded, were for supporting our proposals that we as a cabinet have heard about very recently, about the desire to cut back on our out-of-county placements for additional learning needs. And it was great to see public support for that really cutting new policy area that we're moving down. There were some negative comments, as you would expect, and they tended to relate about the funding for ALN provision, which is disappointing, but it's certainly typical of every authority in the country at the moment. And some negative comments about the failure to fill a half-time specialist teacher vacancy. But I really look forward to next year. It's going to be an exciting year with the Welsh Medium School in Abergavenny moving into its new premises, the expansion of Welsh Medium education in Monmouth. It's really an exciting time, and I would like to congratulate our Cabinet Member for Finance. I think he'll be able to bring this forward with a smile on his face.
Very true. Councillor Garrett, remind me, how long have you been on council?
Oh, far too long. It feels like about a century and a half.
You don't look that old. Councillor Chandler, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's on a similar vein, really. I thought, given that social care now represents the biggest part of the budget proposal and represents 10.6% of the increase, I think it's worth sort of saying a little bit about that. I'm not going to say much because obviously that we've thrashed through the details of this many times before, but recognising that 10.6% increase in the social care budget is there to help us meet the rising costs of providing care, but also the rising and increasing demand for social care in the county. But even that increase isn't sufficient to meet those needs. So social care is still making substantial savings. And I think it's important that that people don't just look at the headline figure and think, well, lots more money there. There is substantial savings going on within social care in a number of areas. More than that, we're also making investments that are actually going to help us to manage our costs in the short term and actually reduce our costs in the long term. And those many investments, whether it's in terms of building new children's homes, whether it's a new commissioning for domiciliary care, changes to the service provision, but also a substantial increase in the fees and allowances we pay to foster carers for looking after our most vulnerable children in the county. All of those things are going to have long-term impacts, both in improving the care that we provide to our residents, as well as managing and sustain, managing our costs for the future and making it into a sustainable service. And I think it was particularly pleasing to note that half the respondents to the budget consultation either agreed or strongly agreed with the social care budget proposals. Only 15% of them disagreed. And I think that's a real ringing endorsement for the proposals we're putting forward, even though that has an impact on people's council tax bills. But knowing that they still supported the proposals we're putting forward. And I think that's a commendment to the quality of our residents, is they recognise the value of looking after our vulnerable neighbours. So I'd like to commend our residents and thank Cabinet and officers for bringing together this budget. I think it's a turning point, I think, for the way forward for us. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Chandler. I think you pick up on a number of points that Councillor Callard was not making very forcefully. This is a bold, forward-looking, investing budget so that we can protect our most vulnerable and disadvantaged, and that we can protect the environment as much as possible. And recognising we're not out the woods yet, there will be significant challenges ahead. But we're putting strong mechanisms in place to enable us together with people in Monmouthshire to weather those storms. Does anyone else want to come in? Councillor Neil, you have 3 questions, I believe, you would like to put to Councillor Callard.
Thank you, Leader. I appreciate that. And thank you for allowing me to join your meeting. If I could possibly just make a quick comment that yesterday we received news that the Chief Executive was returning to the hot seat. And I just wanted to say, tremendously pleased to see that and to wish Paul Matthews well and all good health moving forward, and to say enormous thanks to Peter Davis, to Jonathan Davis, and to the finance team who've stepped up and done an absolutely terrific job in this period. So I hope you don't mind me just making that comment before the question.
That's very good of you to do so, Councillor Neil.
Yeah, to move to the more practical issues of the budget, and I hate to break into the mood of happiness that seems to be breaking out in the room down there, and indeed self-congratulations about charging another 7.8% council tax increase to our residents. But I do need to point out that residents and businesses are continuing to struggle with inflation, and they all understand that customer support and service organisations such as Monmouthshire County Council, they cannot simply keep passing on enormous increases in charges for its services year after year. And this 25-26 budget would increase council tax by nearly 3 times general inflation. resulting in a 3-year compound increase of 23%, just more than 23%. How does the Cabinet propose to retain the trust and the support of our residents when it drives such a big cost as council tax so much higher? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Neil. Councillor Keller, would you like to answer?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question, Councillor Neil. I think, as you mentioned, it is important to retain the trust and support of our residents. And I think certainly through the budget consultation, when we were talking to people, they actually understood the reasons behind the council tax increase. I mean, the services that the council provide are not tied to kind of baseline inflation. They fluctuate based on demands for our services and the type of demand that represents. So I think key to retaining the trust and support of our residents is actually us continuing to explain how the council spends its money, why it spends its money, and that actually the services that the council provides are hugely valued by the residents in our authority. I mean, I work as well, in private industry, and I can say that cost increases are across the board, and they are coming from the private sector as well. It's not something that's limited to local authorities, but in the local authority space, when we look across Wales at the proposed council tax increases for all 22 local authorities, in Monmouthshire we're about in the middle of the pack. And I think when you contrast that with our settlement from Welsh Government being towards the bottom of the pile, then I think actually we can say that we're delivering good value for money for our residents on the services that we provide. It's just that providing those services continues to cost more and more.
Thank you, Councillor Callard.
Thank you. And Leader, may I ask my second question?
You may indeed.
Thank you. It follows on very much from what Councillor Callard was saying. So the budget document describes the medium-term forecast budget shortfall of 23.5 million. And the report is very clear that this forecast itself is a risky number, as it significantly depends on delivering savings and efficiencies whilst managing service budgets, which the council has been unable to do without having an overspend in its core services in each of the last 3 years. The report describes, quotes, alternative delivery models, quotes, new design of services involving the community and other partners, and quotes, the programme of change. Can the Cabinet please set out when it will finally bring forward and explain those planned essential changes which remain currently so nebulous, in order that residents can be assured that by implementing these essential changes, you will avoid charging them more sky-high council tax increases in the next couple of years?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Neil. I mean, I'm sure you'll be aware that before this budget process, our medium-term financial plan forecast budget shortfall was over £34 million. So to see that come down to £23.5 million, I would say is significant progress towards addressing that gap. On your broader point about alternative delivery models and the way that services are evolving in order to make them fit for, that they can be sustainable into the future, I think this is a very similar question to one that was asked but both in the committee that you chair and in response to a motion at our last full council meeting. And I think in posing the question that the changes to our services are somehow unknown, I think it's a bit disingenuous. We explained at the last full council meeting about some of the fantastic changes that are happening within our service delivery, within adult social care specifically. And I know during the scrutiny of the budget, Councillor Chandler spoke at length about the changes that are happening within our social care in order that we can, modernise that service, make it more efficient, and provide the best value for money possible. But that has to be acknowledged with the fact that we are seeing that increase in demand and complexity for our services, and currently that is outrunning the pace of change that we can bring forward, hence why you see the cost pressure. In fact, I would say that this combined year-on-year 10% shortfall in our revenue budget, the fact that we've been able to bridge that gap for the last 3 years is testament to the fact that this authority is continuing to innovate and continuing to develop and provide those services in a way that offers value for money to our residents.
And your third question, Councillor Neil.
Thank you, Leader. Our roads are, as I'm sure we're all only too familiar with, they're in a dreadful state, which residents and the community councils in my ward also describe as dangerous, causing a lot of damage to vehicles and subsequent claims against the council. The personal risk of injury to cyclists and motorcyclists must be considerable and a real concern. I was at one of our community councils last evening, and one of the members of the council went into a pothole with her bicycle and had major dental surgery required on her teeth. The budget appears to plan to borrow funds from the Welsh Government to carry out highways improvement work. Would the Cabinet explain how many claims for damage to vehicles or individuals the Council has received in the last 12 months, and has this increased, and whether these borrowed highways funds will be used to plug the cost of claims rather than fixing the potholes? Thank you.
Councillor Neil, please pass on to the councillor our well wishes and concern for the accident. That is awful. I'm going to mix it up a bit, Councillor Callard, and as Councillor Maybe, if she'd like to come in and discuss highways.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to take this question, please. So the number of points there on the budget question specifically. No, the highways funds to be borrowed will not be used to plug the cost of claims. As I'm sure you're aware, Councillor Neil, this wouldn't come from a capital budget. Insurance claims would be met from the corporate insurance budget. However, they're not of the same. I'll give you the figures, but the claims are in no way of the same scale as the capital budgets that we'll be borrowing in any case. It's worth explaining probably that the local government borrowing initiative that has been put in place to support highways maintenance has an approval framework built around it to ensure that expenditure is aligned to Welsh Government criteria, and will be required to submit a list of schemes and estimated costs to a board, which will include representatives of Welsh Government and WLGA, amongst others. The funding can be used for highways resurfacing, footpath repairs or structures, but it has to be additional. It has to meet additionality criteria, and it can't be used to reduce the council's own highways budgets. So it is restrictive in that way, and it can't be used in the way that you feared. On the question about claims, yes, I've looked at the data. Interesting question. The council's received 51 claims for damage to vehicles so far in 2024 to 25. One to bicycles. Received 98 claims in 2023 to 24 and one to bicycles. For comparison, I thought it was worth looking at a pre-COVID year, because you asked, has this increased? And I thought that the years just before were a bit odd. So I looked at 2019 to 20 and the amounts paid out. I'll tell you about the amounts paid out in a minute. The amount of claims in that year were 87 in 2019 to 20. So it's kind of similar levels, to be honest with you. And the amounts paid out, it's different in each year, and it ranges from 2,000 to 11,000 in total, typically. So it's not the kind of fearful number you might think of, but it's not nothing. Absolutely. And I absolutely take your point about risks and the state of the roads, and it's a national problem which we're very, very aware of, and do all we can constantly to try and bring in more capital funds to address. So thank you. I hope that answers the questions.
Yes, thanks very much. That's really very informative. It's a little surprising that if at the upper end payments are around 11,000, and so far this year we've had about 51, it suggests that there's about £20 per claim. When obviously the claims for car damage will run into many hundreds of pounds. So it's difficult to quite fathom that one. But thank you very much indeed for the explanation.
It's probably worth saying, I should say that not all the claims in the most recent year have closed. So it's 3 years back, they're closed, but there are still outstanding ones. So the figures are still developing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Maybe. Colleagues, we have 6 recommendations which Councillor Callard had outlined in his presentation with us, so I don't propose to take them one by one. They refer to the acceptance of the revenue budget and the capital budget, the 7.8% increase in council tax, improving the changes in proposed savings and pressures, considers the responsible finance officer's report on the robustness of the budget process. We adopt the recommendations for prudential indicators for capital financing, and that we continue those arrangements for regular budget monitoring and scrutiny that have served us well thus far, and that we continue to deliver on the medium-term financial plan. Are we agreed, colleagues?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. You can rest your voice, Councillor Callard, and we'll move on to the leadership funding review, which I believe is over to you, Councillor Grocott.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I'm asking approval of Cabinet to revise the formula for delegating school funding for our secondary schools when it comes to the leadership element, but nothing wider than simply the budget that relates to leadership. We have, as you'll be aware, 4 secondary schools: Monmouth, Chepstow, Caldicot and King Henry VIII School in Abergavenny. But for the purpose of this report, it refers to the secondary element, from the 11 to 19 element of the school age there. The formula has not been examined, let alone changed, since Monmouthshire emerged in its current form. The idea of funding dates back to the late and much lamented Margaret Thatcher and her Education Reform Act. And so the fact that we will very, very shortly now have a school with a different age range of 3 to 19 in our portfolio, it's an obvious time to look at the funding formula. So we've got these 4 schools. The biggest is Monmouth with 1,376. Then comes Caldicot, then King Henry, and the smallest of our 4 secondary age schools is Chepstow with around 665. A working group was set up last year. This was considered and, in fact, I think emerged from the school's budget forum. It contains primary and secondary head teachers, although the primary group very quickly realised that there is no problem with the primary formula, and so it relates purely to the secondary element. So the working group that emerged with this report, head teachers, school business manager, local authority advisors, and it looked at the element from 11 to 16 years of age. It doesn't relate to sixth form because that's funded directly by Welsh Government grant. Conclusions are in the appendices for the report for members to look at. Of the four, 3 schools will actually benefit financially. The smallest, Chepstow, will see a reduction that will be phased in over 2 years so that it causes no major additional financial problems. Having said that, all our 4 comprehensives at the moment are in deficit, but hopefully with our budget that will help them to emerge from that period. But it might be worth saying that when it was discussed at the school budget forum, the only group of those that had contributed to developing these proposals who objected were the governing body at Chepstow Comp. And their objection was simply that they would be the only one of the schools that was getting a reduction in their funding, while they still had exactly the same roles and responsibilities that they had to fund. So I'm asking approval. It has the full consent now of the school's budget forum, which is our professionals, if you like. And if it's approved by Cabinet, the formula takes account and is largely based on school size, the number of phases, and this is the preferred option, which in the report is option 3.
Thank you. I was a bit disconcerted by a voice from Councillor Callard.
My phone was resting against the chair and it made a noise. I'm sorry about that.
It was coming out of his pockets.
That's not the 23 million that we needed to find originally.
Sadly not.
I think I remember the Nolan principles. Thank you, Councillor Grocott. I'm pleased that we have done this review. I'm also pleased that it was a collaborative process, where you wouldn't expect everybody to be in agreement, but the fact that schools themselves, through their teachers and head teachers, are, and that, as the report shows, the decision was made that there was no need to change the primary school allocation and leadership funding in any way. That I think this is coming down the right track. There is just one recommendation, colleagues, and that we approve that amendment to the funding formula for delegating funding to our 4 comprehensive schools. Are we agreed?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you very much. Unanimous. So we come on to trust fund investment strategies. I hope you were able to rest your voice, Councillor Callard, because it's back to you.
Thank you, Leader. The authority acts as the sole trustee for the Welsh Church Fund and a custodian with responsibility for financial arrangements for the Monmouthshire Farm School Endowment Trust Fund. It is therefore required annually to approve investment and fund strategies for these bodies. These ensure that monies are invested in the best interest of the trusts and in order to comply with the Trustee Act of 2000. This ensures consideration is given to the optimal balance of security, liquidity, and yield when taking into account the purposes of the trusts. The strategies provide important frameworks for the trust to operate within and outlines the forecast economic environment that will impact investment decisions throughout the financial year, the types of investments and bodies that will be used, the limits and indicators that will be used to monitor investment performance, the operational procedures that will be in place during the year, and the approach to environmental and social governance. The existing strategies in place for 2024-2025 have proved suitably robust, and the 2025-2026 strategies therefore follow a similar format with no substantive changes to the proposed strategic framework or investment methodology. The authority is also required to determine the grant allocation for the Welsh Church Fund for the forthcoming 2025-2026 financial year. Based on forecast investment returns achieved in 2023-2024 and projections for 2024-2025, it is recommended that the overall grant allocation should be increased to 225,000 in 2025-2026, compared to 210,000 in the current financial year 2024-2025. The distribution of this funding to the 5 constituent local authorities is based on the latest population data as used within the local government funding settlement. This results in a distribution as noted within paragraph 3.22 of the report. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. That is very clear. There are 7 recommendations which are related to this report, all of which Councillor Callard has brought up. Again, I'm not proposing to take them separately. We are asked to note the grant allocation for the year up to July 24, to approve the imposed investment and fund strategy for 25-26, to delegate responsibility for the execution and administration to the Chief Officer for Resources, to approve the 25-26 grant allocation to local authority beneficiaries, to endorse a policy that Monmouthshire County Council and the Welsh Church Fund Trustee ensures that the constituent councils that benefit from grant distributions ensure the grants allocated in line with charitable objectives of the fund, and this fact is advertised on our website, and to endorse the Welsh Church Fund's principles, policy considerations and grant allocations criteria. Are we agreed, Council?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. In which case I'll bring us to the final item on the agenda, homeless accommodation, and over to you, Councillor Birch.
Thank you, Leader. The acquisition of this property is yet another step on the journey to achieve our aim, as set out to Welsh Government policy, of making homelessness rare, brief and unrepeated in Monmouthshire, and of improving the quality and quantity of temporary accommodation we have available to meet the needs of people who become homeless. While we, of course, also try to achieve the long-term goal of developing more permanent, affordable rented accommodation to meet needs in the county. So the report set out the current situation in Monmouthshire, which remains one of the areas in Wales where the private housing market is out of reach for many people, but particularly for single people on low incomes. And there are many reasons why people become homeless. It can be as a result of a relationship breakdown or domestic abuse, the end of a tenancy, job loss or debt issues, rent arrears or inability to work. And in some cases, it can be complicated by mental health or addiction issues, but often it's simply the end of a private tenancy and the fact that a new private tenancy is unaffordable. And then, of course, in around half of cases of threatened homelessness, the Housing Options team are able to work with the applicant to avoid them becoming homeless. But currently, those who do become homeless are likely to spend around a year in temporary accommodation before they're able to secure a permanent social housing tenancy. So we currently have 181 households in temporary accommodation across Monmouthshire, which is a mixture of private rentals, leased properties and properties which we've worked with registered social landlords to purchase using the Welsh Government's Transitional Accommodation or Capital Programme funding. And we're actively looking to increase the number of properties we have available for temporary accommodation. And as a result, we've been successful in reducing the numbers in bed and breakfast, which is the most expensive and least suitable form of accommodation. And at the end of January, we had 30 households in bed and breakfast, which is the lowest number since before the pandemic. And we're, of course, about to open the new accommodation at Sevenview in Chepstow. Unfortunately, we're also about to lose a number of private rentals when landlords are looking to sell or to return to private sector renting. And we have a particular shortage of temporary accommodation in the north of the county. And the overriding need is for shared and self-contained one-bedroom accommodation for single people, which is what this purchase is intended to provide. So the proposed purchase will be funded through Transitional Accommodation Capital Programme funding, Section 106, and previously allocated borrowing, and will result in a net saving to the authority through avoiding expenditure on bed and breakfast accommodation. This is one of those planned and systemic service changes which are bringing down costs to the authority. And this will be the second property which the council has purchased and refurbished for temporary accommodation, in addition, of course, to the recently approved purchase for supported young people's accommodation. And once again, we're proposing to purchase a home which has been empty for some time, and renovated to meet the high standards of for temporary accommodation which the Welsh Government require using local contractors. And the property will also be suitable for tenants with mobility issues. Under the grant conditions, we expect to hold the asset for between 5 and 10 years, and tenants will be supported and the property managed through our existing arrangements for managing temporary accommodation. To convert a property to shared accommodation does of course require planning permission, and an application will be submitted as soon as possible. So this purchase is just one more step towards ensuring that we provide high quality and well supported temporary accommodation in every town for people who need it, as well as increasing that stock of permanent homes.
Thank you. Councillor Sandals, you want
Yes,
to
thank you. I'm really pleased to hear that we're continuing with our plans to look after some of our most vulnerable residents in Monmouthshire. And these plans will obviously go a long way towards addressing and improving the outcomes for our homeless residents. So my question is how many properties in total have we acquired to use for our homeless in Monmouthshire? And are the other interventions that we're doing, are they having a recognisable impact on our homeless residents, please?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I can say that actually our numbers in bed and breakfast are continuing to reduce. It was 30 in January. I was told 24 this morning. And that is, you know, a huge step forward. We have a pipeline of new social housing coming through with £10 million or around £10 million of grant in the current year and next year allocated through that pipeline.
You might have answered how many properties, yeah.
In terms of how many properties, as today, the up-to-date position is 78 private leased, which 84 shared, which is a total of 162, plus we have 18 managed properties.
Wow, okay, thank you.
Thanks. That's really heartening to hear. And I think we all remember when the transition housing strategy was put in place. I think it would have been July 2022. And the impact it is having on our homeless figures, but also on our ability to work in a multi-agency way to work towards what everybody in Monmouthshire wants to see, which is an end to homelessness. I believe you have a question on this matter, Councillor Neil, so I'll bring you in.
Thank you, Leader, and thanks very much also to Councillor Birch for the explanation of the report. And it would be very interesting actually to understand the relative difference between acquiring and purchasing a property and leasing, as you've just indicated, the 78 private leased properties. But I recognise that this is such an important challenge that we need to meet to find the best way to help people who find themselves in extremely tough situations help them towards stable lives where they are able to support themselves independently. And short-term B&B accommodation, as you've rightly said, is certainly not the best way. The plan to acquire a 3-bed residential house in Abergavenny, therefore, may well be in a positive step in this strategy. And if so, you may be planning further purchases, similar ones. And the report makes clear that you're anticipating, I think, 156 placements during the course of the full year. So the scale of the challenge is very clear, and these are mainly of single people. We will await the full details of the costing and consultation details around it. However, it's so important that we also focus on the longer term independence of every one of these homeless people. What are we doing to connect people who are sadly in this situation with work or with work skills to prepare for work? And are there areas of work in which the council itself could directly offer training and employment? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Neil. I think you raised a very interesting point, very important point. And the provision of support for applicants is absolutely crucial, and we consider that any support provided is often as important as the need to provide accommodation. Very much part of the Welsh Government rapid rehousing guidance to avoid individuals going into that that downward spiral that homelessness can sometimes precipitate, or ending up losing their subsequent accommodation. The reality is that at the point of a homeless application, most applicants are in a situation of crisis, and that's the priority that needs to be overcome in the short term. But once the settle period has been achieved, considering employment and skills support needs is an important part of the other support. Some of our higher need applicants may have other longer term support needs and need assistance with issues such as substance misuse or mental health, which may be the main focus of their support provision. Many of our homeless residents are some way from the labour market, but in other cases our challenge is to offer housing close to people's existing work if they become homeless, to enable them to maintain a job. And running alongside the Housing Options Homeless Service, we have a programme of Welsh Government funded housing support, delivering a range of types of projects through the domestic abuse support, mental health, substance misuse and support for young people, delivered through a range of providers. And the majority of the programme is aligned with homelessness. And part of that is to identify employment and training needs. So yes, I think we do need to connect people with employment and skills support, and support providers are able to access the support that's delivered directly through the council. But we probably could do more. I'm particularly keen to ensure that people in temporary and supported housing don't end up in a benefits trap where they can't afford to work. And that is a challenge for us as a council when we also want to recoup the cost of providing accommodation. I think your suggestion that we should look to recruit temporary housing residents or offer work experience is an interesting one, and I'll ask officers to explore it further.
Thanks very much, Councillor Birch. And thank you, Councillor Neil, for such an insightful question.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Thanks very much for the responses.
So that brings us to the recommendations, of which there are two. I'd remind colleagues that the business case Appendix 1 is exempt, but that it approves the acquisition of the property utilising the Transitional Accommodation Capital Programme grants, as Councillor Birch outlined, and it is subject to the Welsh Government approval. But do we approve?
Yeah.
Secondly, do we approve the delegation of responsibility to approve future property acquisition for homelessness to the Deputy Chief Executive in liaison with the Cabinet Member for Rural Affairs, Housing and Tourism, and the Deputy Leader, otherwise known as Councillor Griffiths and Councillor Birch? Do we approve, Cabinet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With that, I draw Cabinet to a close and thank everybody online for joining with us, and thank Councillor Neil, and I think Councillor John and Councillor Taylor were able to join us for part of the meeting. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheerio.